Hello, this is a synopsis for chapter 7 of in the textbook. And in this chapter, I'm going to go over how to do the bond calculations. Now, you already are somewhat familiar, believe it or not, with how to do these bond calculations, because when we calculate when we do these bond calculations, we are simply using the same row of keys, the third row on our calculator that we used in chapter 5 for the time value of money. So let's take a look. Let's go ahead and get started on the chapter. So we're going to look at the key features of bonds. I'm going to go over that rather quickly because you can read that on your own. I really want to concentrate on the calculations. We're going to talk about bond valuation, which is calculations, and then briefly talk about yield and risk. All right, so what is a bond? Well, and we're basically talking about corporate bonds in this chapter. A corporate bond is a debt instrument. Of course, government bonds are debt instruments too, but we're mainly focusing on corporate bonds here. So a corporate bond is a debt instrument where the borrower agrees to make payments and of principal and interest on specific dates to the holders of the bond. So if you buy a corporate bond, the par value, the value of the bond is typically $1,000. They're sold in $1,000 increments. So if you buy a corporate bond, pay $1,000, you're going to get your annual interest payments. Most the bonds may be paid annually, the interest, or they may be paid semi-annually. Most bonds are paid, the interest is paid semi-annually. And then at the end of the life of the bond, at maturity, you get your $1,000 back. And so that's the way bonds work. And you're basically guaranteed the payment. That's the coupon payment on the bond is the rate of interest that you're going to get. If the company doesn't make the interest payments, they're in default. So unless they default on their bonds, you can count on getting those interest payments and then the principal back at the end. So here's the key features of a bond. The par value, that's the face amount. Typically it's $1,000. If they don't tell you if they don't tell you the par value, you assume that it's $1,000. The coupon interest rate, that's the rate that's stated on the bond that they're going to pay. The maturity date is when the bond's going to mature. The issue date is when it was issued. And then they might put the yield to maturity on the bond. Once the bond, when the bond is initially issued, the yield to maturity and the coupon rate are the same. It only changes if the market interest rates change after the bond has been issued, which that's the crux of bond valuation, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Here's some other features of bonds. A convertible bond that can be converted to common stock. A warrant has a specific number of shares of common stock at a specific price. A puttable bond allows the holder to sell the bond back to the company prior to maturity. An income bond only pays interest when the company makes a profit. And then some bonds, these are typically government bonds, like savings bonds, sometimes are indexed based on the inflation rate to make them a little bit more appealing. If interest rates go up, then if inflation goes up, then the interest rate they pay will go up. Some bonds have a call feature, and the effect of a call feature, it allows the issuer to call the bond in early. This typically happens if we have a situation where interest rates are declining. So just consider this. A company has issued 20-year bonds at 8%. 5 years later, interest rates go down to 6%. Well, the company would like to call those bonds in. They can pay off those 8% bonds and issue new bonds at 6%. So if a bond has a call feature and interest rates have gone down, then you can bet that the bond will probably be called in. So that's what a call feature is. Typically what happens with a call feature is there's a call premium. They'll give you a little bit more than $1,000 if they call the bond in, maybe $1,050. And it's just because that's just the risk of having the bond, but you get a little bit, if they do call the bond in, you get a little bit higher value when they call it in. A sinking fund is simply if a company wants to make a provision to pay a loan off, to pay the loan off over the life of the loan, or the bond off over the life of the bond. So in other words, let's say that a company issues $100,000 worth, or let's say they issue $1 million worth of 10-year bonds. Well, at the end of that 10 years, they're going to have to pay all the principal back, which is the $1 million, right? Well, they can have a sinking fund where they decide we're going to pay off 10% of those bonds each year. So in effect, what they're going to do is they're going to pay off $100,000 worth of the bonds each year. So then at the end of it, they only have the last 100,000 to pay off. They don't have to come up with this huge balloon note, if you will, or balloon payment. And so investors don't really mind that because it is less risk for the company to do that. It's less risk for the bondholder. So they'll have a sinking fund where they save up, they have this fund, and then it's to pay off the bonds systematically. And it's just like a lottery system. They just, your number may or may not be called to call your bond in. All right. So there's just more details on that. Okay, so here's this timeline again. Now, with a bond, I'm just going to explain. Hang on a second. This would be better. So anyway, I'm not going to talk anything about this timeline. That's just your typical timeline. They're going to have the present value of the bond, the future value, and the payments are going to be the cash flows. The interest rate, the way they come up with the interest rate is the formula that we were looking at in the last chapter. Okay, now you can go over the book and take a look at the formula to calculate the value of a bond, but I'm going to show you how to do it in your calculator. But please take the time to look at the formula just so you know. Basically, all a bond valuation is we're finding the present value of this annuity stream, the present value of the interest payments, plus the present value of this $1,000 out here. So we have this bond. This is a 10% bond. It's paying us $100 a year. And at the end, whenever that may be, we're going to get our $1,000 back. So if we found the present value of this bond, if we took the present value of this $100 annuity plus the present value of the $1,000 par value at 10%, and the coupon rate is 10%, that's how we get this $100. The value is going to be $1,000. So here they're just illustrating that the value is $1,000 as long as the coupon rate stays the same as the market interest rate, then the value of this bond is always going to be $1,000. Okay, so let me explain why we even bother with bond valuation, because the reason is that the interest rates, as you know, interest rates do not stay the same. So if interest rates increase, this is the market interest rate. So when this bond was issued, the market interest rate was 10%. So they issued the bond at 10%. But if after the bond is issued, the interest rates increase, okay, then this bond is going to sell at a discount. So when interest rates is an inverse relationship, when market interest rates increase, then existing bonds are going to sell at a discount. The price goes down. And so that's the whole point of bond valuation, is we are going to figure out if this interest rate increased, how much would this cause the price of the bond to go down? And conversely, if interest rates decrease after a bond is issued, then the bond price is going to go up. It's going to sell at a premium. So that's what we're doing in this chapter, is finding out how to calculate the value of a bond. Okay, so here we go. So here they're just showing you. Now this is the same thing that up here, but they're showing you how to do it in the financial calculator. Only they're telling us that it's a 10-year bond. Okay, so we have this bond it's a 10% coupon bond, $1,000 par value, 10-year bond, what's the present value? What's the price of the bond today? Well, you see the market interest rate never changed. So as long as the interest rate, the market interest rate stays the same as the coupon rate of 10% to 10%, this is $100 because it's a 10% bond at a $1,000 par value. So if the coupon rate and the market interest rate stays the same, the price of the bond will not deviate from $1,000. So that's what they're showing you here. What happens if interest rates go up? So we have this bond. This is the same bond. It's a 10% coupon bond. Second. I'm sorry, they've scratched that. They have changed the coupon rate here. So here they're saying, what would happen if you had if you purchased a bond with a 13% coupon rate, but interest rates have gone down to 10% after this bond was issued? Well, what's going to happen is the price of that bond is going to go up. It's going to sell at a premium. All right. So they're asking us to calculate the price. So this is the way you set the problem up. First you have to calculate the payment, and the payment is going to be $1,000, the $1,000 par value times the coupon rate. So $1,000 times 13% is $130. So the payment's $130. The future value is the par value of $1,000. It's a 10-year bond, and the current interest rate is 10% right here. That's called the yield to maturity. Okay, so you just enter these in your calculator, you hit compute and present value, and there's the price of the bond. So theoretically, you would be indifferent between paying $1,184 for this 13% bond or $1,000 for a 10% bond. We're just making it equal out. Okay, so this is a situation, just to repeat, if interest rates go down after a bond is issued, here that's gone down from 13% to 10%, bond's going to sell at a premium. Now, what happens if interest rates increase after the bond is issued? Well, then the bond is going to sell at a discount. So here we have a situation where it's a 7% coupon bond that was issued, but interest rates have gone up to 10%. Okay, so it's a 7% bond. It's a $70 payment. So we're going to calculate the present value. And remember, you just enter all these and you hit compute present value. And we get, of course, you're disregarding the negative sign. And we get $815.66. So we would be indifferent between buying this bond or for $815 or buying a 10% bond at the current market rate for $1,000. So if interest rates decrease after the bond is issued, then, I'm sorry, if interest rates increase after the bond is issued, then the bond will sell at a discount. Okay, and this is just showing that if we were calculating like this 13% bond, we calculated it back 10 years and we got 1184. If we went back 9 years, 8 years, 7 years, as this bond gets more towards maturity, it's going to approach $1,000. So if you took the present value back 9 years, it's going to be a little bit higher. Same here. It's going to be it's going to be lower. It's going to be approaching the $1,000. If with this bond selling at a discount, as it gets more towards maturity, the price increases, and at maturity, they would both be at $1,000. So in other words, 5 years from now, if you calculated the present value of this bond, it's going to be lower, and this one would be higher because the closer they get to maturity, they approach that $1,000. All right. Now you can also calculate, in addition to calculating the price of a bond, sometimes they'll give you the price and they'll ask you to calculate the yield to maturity. So in this situation, they're saying, well, this bond is selling for $887. and it's a 9% coupon. If I bought this bond, what kind of rate of return am I getting? That's basically what the yield to maturity is, my overall rate of return. So I simply put this in the financial calculator. You have to enter this present value in as a negative number, or you'll get an error message. Because remember, if you have a situation where you're entering in the present value and the future value, you've got to enter in the present value as a negative. So put in your entries here. The price of the bond today is $887. The payment is $90 because it's a 9% coupon bond. And the future value is 1,000, par value, N is 10, and it's 10-year bond. You compute I-Y, and so we see that the yield to maturity is 10.91%. This is how you would do it in Excel right here. So this is a situation where you're solving for yield to maturity. All right, now they're asking here, let's see, solving for the yield to maturity of this bond is 7.08%. Oh, so back here, this bond was selling at a discount, and they just, we have this yield to maturity. This bond is selling at a premium. So they're just having us calculate the yield to maturity here. And it's 7.08% with this. This is a bond that is selling for $1134.20. It's a 9% coupon, but the yield to maturity is 7.08%. Okay, now there's two components that make up the yield to maturity. There is the current yield plus the capital gains yield. So the yield to maturity is the expected total return, and the yield to maturity equals the capital gains yield plus the current yield. So the current yield is what you're making each year on the interest payment. It's the annual coupon payment divided by the price. The capital gains yield is the annual change in the price of the bond. Remember on that chart a couple slides ago, I showed you how as you get close, the price changes each year. So the annual percentage change in the price, that's your capital gains yield. So let's take a look here at this. So remember, let's see, let's go back a couple slides. Remember this slide here. This bond is selling for $887, and the yield to maturity is 10.91%. So I'd like to know, what's my current yield on this bond? This is my yield. If I hold this bond till maturity, this is what I'm making each year. But I want to know, I mean, overall, my total return is this. But I'd like to know, I'd like to have this broken down from current yield, what I'm going to get each year from the coupon payment, plus my capital gains yield. So we're going to break that down. Just remember these numbers. We're going to use those same numbers up here. Okay, so the yield to maturity on this bond, hang on a second. The yield to maturity is 10.91%. So, okay, so right here we have 10.91% is the yield to maturity. Now let's calculate the capital gains yield and the current yield. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is calculate the current yield. If you take $90, the coupon payment, divided by the price, that's your that gives you the current yield. That's 10.15%. So remember, our capital gain, our yield to maturity was 10.91%. Our current yield is 10.15%. So the capital gains yield, you can find the present value of the bond going back 9 years. We already went back 10 years. We could find the present value going back 9 years and then calculate the difference in the price, the percentage change in the price to get the capital gains yield. But it's easier simply to take the difference between the yield to maturity and the current yield. That's what they're doing on the next slide here. So remember, the yield to maturity equals the current yield plus the capital gains yield. In this case, the yield to maturity is 10.91%. The current yield is 10.15%. So if we take 10.91 minus 10.15, we get 0.76. That's the capital gains yield. So what does this mean? It means that, okay, so remember these numbers, 10.91, 10.15, and 0.76. I'm going to go back and show you and explain that to you. So what that means is from the, what that means is we paid $887 for this bond, but we're getting $1,000 at the end of this, right? So the current yield, the $90 divided by the 887, that's our 10.15%. That's our current yield. The fact that we paid only 887 for it, but we're getting 1,000 back, that's our capital gains yield. That's the 0.76 or whatever. So those are the two components that make up the 10.91. Okay, and then in this section, let's see, in this example, let me hang on a second. Let me see if, yeah, they don't, you can work this out on your own. Hang on. Sorry for doing this to you guys. Okay, so for this one, do this one on your own for practice. Go to the formula and calculate the current yield, which is going to be $90 divided by the 1134.20. That will give you your current yield. And then you're going to take 7.08 minus your current yield, and that'll give you your capital gains yield. Now, in this case, your capital gains yield is going to be negative because you paid $1,134, but you're only getting 1,000 at the end. So the capital gains yield will turn out to be negative. Okay, so main takeaways here, we've calculated the price of a bond. We've also calculated the yield to maturity on a bond. And we broke down the yield to maturity to the current yield plus the capital gains yield. All right. Now, bonds have there's a couple types of risk with bonds. One of the risks is called reinvestment risk. That is the fact if interest rates fall and the bond is called in or it matures, you have to reinvest that money in another bond that's paying a lower interest rate. That's reinvestment risk. The other type of risk with the bond is price risk. Price risk is the risk if interest rates are going up and bond prices fall. So we're in that situation now. Interest rates are at record lows. They're going to be going up at some point. So as interest rates go up, then the price of the bonds will fall. So price risk and reinvestment risk is what you have typically with bonds. Now, this is just showing you that most bonds don't pay annually, they pay semi-annually. So if you have a semi-annual coupon bond, remember back in chapter 5 with semi-annual, when you're getting your return semi-annually. So you have to make some changes here. You have to multiply the number of years by 2. If you have the I-Y, if they give you the rate of return interest rate, you've got to divide that by 2. The coupon payment has to be divided by 2. So remember, coupon payment divided by 2, I-Y divided by 2, and you multiply n times 2 in order to calculate semi-annual coupon bond. So here's an example. If what is the present value of a 10-year, 10% semi-annual coupon bond if the required rate of return is 13%? So, by required rate of return, I mean the market interest rate. Okay, so the future value is 1,000. The payment is $1,000 times 10% divided by 2, $50. The interest rate is 13% divided by 2, 6.5%, N is 10 times 2, which is 20. And so we get the price of the bond is $834.72. So those are here's an example of how you would do a semi-annual coupon bond. Okay, and this is just, you can skip this, but they're just showing you, this is that effective annual rate from chapter 5. If you had a semi-annual coupon bond paying you 10%, you're actually making 10.25% because it's being paid semi-annually. And then this is, they're just going over some more examples here. So the last thing I wanted to mention to you is when you have these semi-annual coupon bonds, if you're asked to calculate the yield to maturity, right here, when you get the yield to maturity, your answer is going to be per 6 months. So to find the yield to maturity, anytime it says yield, it means annual. So if you have to solve for the yield to maturity, this isn't your final answer. You would have to multiply this by 2 in order to get the final answer. So if you're calculating the yield to maturity for a semi-annual coupon bond, you have to multiply the answer that you get on the calculator. You've got to multiply that by 2 for your final answer. All right, let me see. Oh, this one, yield to call. This is just saying that if if interest rates have gone down, you can assume that a bond is going to be called in. And so we would calculate a yield to call. So this bond is a 10-year bond, but it's selling for a premium. So we know that interest rates have gone down because it's selling for a premium. So the bond's probably going to be called in. It can be called in 4 years. So we can't assume that we're going to make this yield to maturity because we're not going to be able to hold the bond for 10 years. So let's calculate the yield to call, assuming that the bond will be called in 4 years. So we're going to get an extra $50 if it's called in. So the future value is $10.50. The payment is $50. The $100 divided by 2. N is 4 years times 2 is 8. The present value, it's currently selling for $1135.90. And we compute I-Y, and it's 3.56. We have to multiply this by 2. Okay, so it's going to be, the final answer is going to be 7.137%. That's our yield to call right there. Okay, and if the interest rates have gone down, then a bond is likely to be called in. Okay, you can read this at the end of the chapter, as I was mentioning earlier. Well, this is in chapter 6, where they talk about the bond ratings. They talk about this again in chapter 7. You can take a look and see at these ratings here. Okay, and then bankruptcy, you have chapter 11 and chapter 7 bankruptcy. Make sure you take a look at that. Chapter 11 is reorganization. So most companies, when they file chapter 11, that just means that they can keep their creditors at bay while they reorganize to try to save the company. They hopefully will be stronger once they reemerge. Chapter 7 is liquidation, and you don't really want to see chapter 7, but chapter 11 is the most common one. Okay, thanks for watching, and this was the chapter 7 synopsis.